All right. So it's my pleasure to welcome our guest tonight, author Diana Abu Jaber, and I am Giovanna Fiorino Yanache, and I'm the Adult Programming and Outreach Librarian here at the Harrison Public Library. And I was fortunate enough, I entered a raffle on Facebook for an opportunity to have Diana Abu Jaber talk with our book club, and we won. So very happy to be the winner of that raffle. And a little bit about our guest. Diana Abu Jaber was born in Syracuse, New York, to an American mother and a Jordanian father. Her family moved to Jordan a few times throughout her childhood, and elements of both her American and Jordanian experiences, as well as cross cultural issues, especially culinary reflections, appear in her work. Her culinary memoir, Life Without a Recipe, has been described as a book of love, death, and cake. Ruth Reichel calls it, quote, bold and luscious, end quote, and, quote, indispensable to anyone trying to forge their own truer path, end quote. Her young adult novel, Silverwood, a fantasy with an Arab American girl at its heart, was published last spring from Crown Books Random House. Her novel, Birds of Paradise, won the 2012 Arab American National Book Award. It was also named one of the top books of the year by National Public Radio, the Washington Post, and the Oregonian. Sorry for mispronouncing.
Oregonian, yeah.
Her novel Origin was named one of the best books of the year by the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and Washington Post. Her second novel, Crescent, won the Penn Center Award for Literary Fiction and the American Book Award. Her first novel, Arabian Jazz, won the Oregon Book Award for Literary Fiction and was a finalist for the Penn Hemingway Award. The Language of Baklava, her first memoir, won the Northwest Booksellers Award and has been translated into many languages. And Diana teaches writing and literature at Portland State University and divides her time between South Florida and Portland, Oregon. And we are here tonight to talk about her latest novel, Fencing with the King. So please join me in welcoming Diana Abu Jaber.
Thank you, Giovanna. That's great. And thank you for hosting me. It's wonderful to be here. If you like, I can give you sort of a little of the backstory of how I got started with writing the book.
Sure.
And please, feel free to ask questions. I love questions, and I'm always happy to hear what people make of books. It's such a solitary endeavor that it's really exciting when it's time to actually share your work with people. So I feel like that's the conversation. That's the really fun part of being a writer. So with Fencing with the King, I was in Jordan. I was in Amman, Jordan, and I was there on a Fulbright. I had decided to go back after many years of being away. As a child, I had spent years off and on in Jordan. My dad, he's from that area, and he never really made his peace with being in the United States. To him, it was kind of a temporary situation. Even after we had been in the States for years and years, he always had this attitude like it was just a big, wacky mistake and it was all going to get cleared up someday. And, we would all move to Jordan. So I was on this Fulbright and my parents were here in the States. And I overheard some of my uncles talking about my dad. They always talk about the one who isn't there, gossiping away. And I heard them saying that he was the favorite. And I said, the favorite? What are you guys talking about? And they said, well, your father was King Hussein's favorite fencing partner. And I had never heard this before. I didn't even know that my father knew how to fence, much less that he was someone who had fenced with the king. It was a surprise. And this was the kind of thing that happened to me a lot. And I think it's something that many of us who are either from an immigrant background or are immigrants ourselves, or have that somewhere in our ancestry, we can identify with that division that often happens. You know, when you move from country to country, your life can almost bifurcate into different stories, different narratives. And your kids might know your new self in your new country, but they often won't know that much about the older self. And that was definitely true for my sisters and I. We kept having this experience where we would think we know who our father was, but then we would discover these wild things. And so that led me to start imagining this almost a what if kind of plot line. And this is one of my favorite ways of telling stories, is to have a situation, and it doesn't have to be a real life situation, but if it is, even better. And then ask yourself, what if, what if I was someone who used to fence with King Hussein, and I emigrated to the United States and I left that whole life behind. And then one day, years later, say 35 years later, I get a invitation in the mail, and it's asking me to come back for a rematch. What would that be like? What if that happened? And it's almost a kind of game that I play with myself. I'm not always thinking about novels, but sometimes that's what happens. You know, these imaginary kinds of circumstances, they fuel your imagination, and you start to let yourself go off on these journeys. So that was kind of the taking off point for me. One of them. That was one of them. And from that real life beginning, the novel grew. It grew its characters, it grew its situation, and it became Fencing with the King. So that's just a little taste of where it started. There are, for me, and I think for many writers, and maybe some people here are writers as well. You know that novels generally have more than one taking off point. There's usually several different ideas, real life circumstances, actual people who become triggers. They become switches that send you into that imagined world, that creative story, and let you build from there. And that was one of them for me. So yeah, just to give you a sense of what I was working from. Um, and yeah, I would love it if anyone had a question for me that you might be able to throw out there.
Well, I have some questions, so I'll start us off.
Right.
Because in your author's note, you mentioned, like you just said now, that your father was the the king, one of the king's fencers, that you had several relatives that were high-ranking officials, and that you even had an uncle who lived in a cave. So
Yeah.
obviously, if they read this book, will they, how will they, what was their response to you writing about something that they recognized maybe had a little similarity to their own lives?
A little bit, a little bit. It's tricky. It's always a tricky situation. And I think it's something that all writers have to grapple with. How much do you share? How much of real life can you put into your book? And I mean, you can put as much as you want in there, but then you risk relationships sometimes. And with my first novel, the way back in the 90s, my first novel, Arabian Jazz, it was somewhat autobiographical. about a young Arab American woman coming into her own, taking on, trying to find her identity. And there was how to put it exactly, blowback. Um, One of my cousins was so upset about that novel that her mother told me that my cousin said I was no longer welcome to eat at her table. And I was so taken aback by that. I wasn't prepared to have heard that. And I said, I didn't even write about her. And my auntie said, that's why. And I realized that this is the kind of thing that you can't really engineer. You can't write to make people happy. You can't even write to protect yourself. You have to tell your story, I believe, as with as much emotional honesty as you can. So that means maybe the situations come from real life, but you let your characters grow into themselves imaginatively. And you have to be in touch with the emotions that are real emotions that actual people would feel in these situations. You can't fake that. Um, so with Fencing with the King, I did have I have several uncles who were high ranking. I had an uncle who was a member of the King's cabinet, many politicians, many professors. My dad had 7 brothers, so big family. And because of that, you know, this was a sensitive area, but in the end, I I told myself, and I believe this, that your story, whatever it is, your story belongs to you. And they were part of my story. My story was about the search for identity and the understanding of culture. And so I decided that I had to be a little bit fearless, if you will. I had to risk telling parts of other people's stories too. And sometimes that included reporting on bad behavior. And so that happened, some of my bridges got burned, some of my bridges got firebombed. I mean, it was considerably risky for some of these situations. And I did hear back from some of the relatives. Um, by this point, this is my 8th book. And so my family is kind of used to me now. They've overcome, they've gotten, maybe not overcome, they've gotten used to um, the experience of having a writer in the family.
Okay.
Which I think is shocking. Um,
Is
and
your
I'm
father,
hoping that they forgive me.
is your father the only sibling living here?
Oh, no, Connie, Anne has a question. Say that again, Anne.
Is your father the only one of his siblings living in the States? The rest of them all in Jordan?
Well, that's how it turned out. A number of them came to the United States. I think something like 5 of my uncles emigrated to the United States to get their degrees. Basically, they came to get an education. Most of them went to Syracuse University, so they all congregated here. And my dad followed them because he was one of the younger brothers.
So you've met them all?
But of those uncles, they all went back to Jordan, every single one. One of them stayed in the United States for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
He had a whole career as a university professor. A couple of them taught or worked in politics in the United States for 5, 10, 15 years, but all of them ended up returning to Jordan, except for my dad.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Just
so
like
You
Gabe.
know all of them then?
Oh, say that again.
Know all of them? You've met and you know all of them?
I met almost all of them. There actually was another brother who I should also count. So actually, Dad had 8 brothers, um, who died when he was very young. He had appendicitis, and they didn't have any treatment for it. So yeah,
You met
yeah.
the royal family? On your
Say that
travels, have you met
Have
the
you met the
royal
royal family?
I've met some of them. I've met Queen Noor. I've
Mm.
met some of the princesses, some of the children of King Hussein's generation. I've not met King Abdullah or Queen Rania. I would love to. But they, the royal family in Jordan is very much intermingled with the day to day. They get out there. You see them in restaurants. You see them. You can rub elbows with people, and they have parties, and they'll invite, if you're a writer, even if you're just an American visiting from the United States. Americans are like celebrities because there's so few of them there. So yeah, it's more permeable in a way than it is in the United States,
Mm.
where I feel like things are a little bit more stratified, which is funny because democracy. But
Ironic, isn't it?
yes,
Well, there
yes.
you go. That's your next book.
Yeah, it should be,
King.
right? Yeah,
Dining
maybe
with the King.
so. Maybe.
You could say you were
With the
inspired by
visit
this
and-
book chat.
Yes, exactly. It's actually, it's giving me some great ideas.
And Karen commented in the chat that she read and enjoyed Queen Noor's memoir a few years ago.
Oh, yes. Oh, her memoir. What was that called? A Surprising Life, something like that. Queen Noor, I had a funny experience with her because I was on a flight from Washington, D.C. to New York when I was on book tour for my first book. And they cordoned off the first part of the front of the plane. And they told the rest of us in the back, the rank and file, that we had to stay separate from there because there was a VIP up front. And it turned out it was Queen Noor. And my husband was with me, and he said, give her your book. So, and I hadn't ever met her before. So, and I only had this old beat up, nasty, book tour copy that oh, that's it. An Unexpected Life. Yes. Thank you, Karen. So I gave it to the flight attendant and I said, do you think you could give this to Queen Noor? And she said, well, no, no promises, but I'll see what I can do. After the flight, they sent it up. I didn't hear anything more. I thought, well, maybe she'll get it, maybe she won't. They sent us off the back of the plane. They sent Queen Noor and her entourage off the front of the plane. I thought, that's it. I was at baggage claim, and these guys in suits with little ear things surrounded my husband and I. And this young woman with a walkie-talkie came up to me and said, "Are you the author, Diana Abu Jaber?" I said, "Yes. Please don't arrest me." And she said, "Oh, please stand by." And there was like a parting of the crowd, and Queen Noor, resplendent in a turquoise jumpsuit, came forth, and she said, "I am so pleased to meet you." And she was just lovely. She said she had read my book, and she was so proud of me as a Jordanian. And oh, it was like the highlight of everything. So she turned out to be a wonderful person, and she said, if you come back to Jordan, please let me know. And we stayed in touch, and they had us over to the castle, one of the several palaces. And yeah, They're just
Wow.
wonderful, wonderful people. Yeah. So.
And that came through in your book, how the Jordanians are very kind and giving.
They are.
And
They
it's to
really
complete
are.
strangers.
Yes.
Well, according to how it turned out in your book. So I'm assuming that that's, you know, based on your personal interaction with them as well.
Absolutely. I think, you know, partly it's about being in a developing country, not having a lot of material stuff. There's a mystique around the West, you know, and part of that, of course, is a colonial legacy, which, you know, not so great. But, you know, there is this sense that Americans and English, that this is the cool stuff, that this is the way you want to be and behave. So I do think that that's part of that welcoming, but I also think it's the culture of hospitality. Hospitality is held up as the ultimate virtue in many parts of the Middle East, and especially in Jordan, because it's a really Bedouin fundamental tradition for the Bedouins. You know, if you're crossing the desert, you have to be hospitable to each other, because it could keep people alive. It can be the difference between life and death. And so a guest is considered exalted above all others. And when people see you in Jordan, if anyone ever goes or has been there, you know, the greeting is ahlein, which means be twice welcomed. You know, it's this idea like we are welcoming you into our home. You are our guest, and our guest is our family. So I think it's a really nice model for how to you know, how to treat your guests. Yeah.
And here it is. We always thought the Italians were the ones that were so like eat, manja, manja. And that's what I mean. It's like you find this commonality, and usually
Right.
the food, because you know, when Aman has her ordeal, and I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't finished, and there, once she's located, everyone's so willing, you know, to provide her with whatever nourishment, whatever need that she has, to give up their own bed. And I thought, oh my goodness, what a lovely response there, you know, that so, and not knowing who she was, right? Not knowing
Yes.
who she was connected to in any way.
That's right. That's right. You just know that this is a person who needs help, and you extend yourself, because that is the sacrament. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if
Absolutely.
anyone else has any questions, but I have more questions, and you can unmute or you could type in the chat. Oh, Anne has her hand up. Anne, go ahead. Oh,
No?
oh, Adrian, go ahead. Whoever
Okay,
wants to go.
yeah, okay. So I do, first of all, what I want to say, Diana, is what a magnificent job you did with the feeling I got from this book. I felt like I was in Jordan. I absolutely, the culture, it just, it really took me away, and I really felt immersed in the book. I think you did just a lovely, lovely job with your descriptions. That's the first thing. And I'm just curious. So Hafiz, am I saying it incorrectly?
Yes, Hafiz.
You kind of let him off the hook. And I was just wondering if it's just because that's a reflection of what goes on with people of power. Just kind of wondering about your motivation.
You know, Adrian, you echo what a few people have said to me about Hafez. A few people have said that they were really waiting for revenge. You know, they wanted justice. And I'll tell you, it's I'm very much of two minds about it. There is part of me, actually, not long after the book was published, I woke up one morning in almost in the state, and I thought, I've written the wrong ending. I should have killed Hafez. Oh dear, spoiler alert, sorry. But uh, you know, his story was indeed based on a family story. Not exactly, it's not exactly the same. It's a revisiting of a very similar story. And in the real life story, the criminal got away. He got away. And and the more I thought about it, I thought, this often is how it works. I mean, we believe in karma. I love karma. I think karma is very important.
Right.
But I see that our criminals often get away with it. And that's part of the great struggle, of being a human being in the world. We want justice. We want the balance, the scales to balance, and dang it, sometimes they do not balance. And I think partly too, as I was writing his story, I started to feel some empathy for him, which I hadn't expected and I did not want. I was very angry with this character. I mean, I just, you know, but the more I worked on him, the closer I got to him. It was very weird. And I started to think, gosh, I see what motivates a little bit. I mean, not completely. I think a lot of it is very problematic, but I see the ways that people are motivated by this starved kind of quality that happens. In Hafez's case, it's because he never got his father's love, so it created this howling void, if you will, where he always needs to fill it. And even if he got all the things he wanted, like even if he got the knife ill-safe, he would want something else. He's that disabled, he's that damaged of a person. So in the end, I kind of ended up feeling like he is his own karma.
Yes.
He has to be himself.
Yes. And he has to live with himself.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this is one of those really, really tough kinds of decisions. Do you meet at justice, and how much justice can we meet? Oh yes, there you go. His guilt and his shame are his punishment. Thank you, Giovanna. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Adrienne.
Anne, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? You had your hand up.
Yeah, I was asking about the Falcon episode and how you decided to have Amani injured by the Falcon and the significance.
In the first chapter, yeah.
Yeah, the Falcon, that was something I hadn't planned on. And it was another one of these surprises where I discovered that my father and some of his brothers had practiced falconry. I don't know if anyone has ever been to a city where they have a falconry program. Some cities set falcons loose to chase away all the swallows, like the big murmurations of birds that will congregate in some cities. And Portland had a falconry program where they were setting them loose. And my parents had come out to visit me. I was in Portland at the time, and we were walking through downtown, and there was a falconer out there wearing the glove with the calling the falcons. and my father were just standing there, and just like kind of in this sort of, I don't know how to describe it exactly, casual way, he whistles, he lets go this kind of, this very distinctive whistle. And you see these falcons, these two falcons come right down. And the falconer looks over at my dad and says, how did you know this? Oh, hi, babe. Are you, this is my daughter, Grace.
Hello.
Oh, okay. All right. That she's my timekeeper. Thank you, honey. So anyway, yes, my father was able to call down these two falcons, and the falconer came over and he said, how, you've worked with the birds before? And he said, yes. And I said, what? And that story came out. And so when I was writing Fencing with the King, I thought, I need a kind of an omen. I wanted an omanic, if that's a word. Is that a word? Omanic kind of moment to open the novel. The way I see it, and I'm just the writer, this is my interpretation of it. I see this as the moment that Amani is kind of marked by Jordan. It's this kind of claiming, if you will. It's like the country is embodied in the falcon, and by marking her, it's saying you are of us. You are partially of us, and that is, as I see it, that is the start of her real journey into her identity and sort of self-discovery.
Yes, I love that answer. And that's one of our questions we have for the discussion is the symbolism of the falcon. And Anne put in significance of the clothing and all the dresses.
Oh, yeah. That was a real interesting thing for me when I was in Jordan. When I went on the Fulbright, I packed up my usual wardrobe, which was like jeans and t-shirts, very American casual stuff. I was not prepared for what a dressy culture Jordan is, at least certain socioeconomic levels of it. But even, I would say most of my family is pretty middle class, but there are subtle differences between the classes in developing countries and the classes here. And a middle class in a developing country is often considered upper. So I think that part of it is about presenting yourself in a way that is, again, kind of Western, more sophisticated, a kind of a chic kind of a look. And it's different. It's not an American look. And so for me, when I was there, my aunties, who were, some of them were American, some of them were Jordanian, but all of them had lived in Jordan for a long time. My wardrobe was unacceptable. And so I found that I spent a lot of time being dressed, being made over. Part of it is just that I'm a newcomer and it's more entertaining to work on a fresh canvas. And to them, that was also part of that claiming, that they were kind of taking off the American Diana and putting on the Jordanian Diana. And of course, I don't have very Arab coloring, I'm very pale. And so I think that putting on the correct clothing, the correct covering became very important to them. And, you know, the way the women dress, it's not just about modesty, although modesty is very, very important there. For a woman to be dressed modestly means a fair amount of coverage. And people used to say from the chin to the wrist to the ankles. So it became a kind of education in identity again. Are you an American who is visiting, a tourist? If you are, then you stay in your clothes. But if you want to be of this place, then you have to change, you know, go get dressed for dinner because the grown-ups are coming. And yeah, I wanted that to be a part of Amani's education as well, that if she wanted to participate, at least in the women's culture, she had to dress differently. And if she had been a boy, she would have had to dress differently as well. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know our time is up, and I just wanted to ask one last question because, you know, I assume like the fencing scenes you had your father maybe to go to for, you know, advice, because I really felt like I was there watching them when you were describing the steps back and forward and the hits. But then there's that intense sandstorm, and I won't say anything more about it, but I felt like I was in there. I felt the sand hitting my face. And
Oh,
have
that's
you
great.
ever experienced a sandstorm? Because it just felt like so real and vivid.
Oh, thank you, Giovanna. That means a lot to me. I'm very happy to hear that. It's an important scene. It's and I really wanted it to have a visceral impact. I wanted people to feel like they were there. I'll tell you what it's based on. I was not actually lost in the desert, thank God. But I did have an experience where this was a separate trip. My husband and I came back to Jordan on a State Department trip where back in the good old days, you know, this was about 10 years ago now, they would send authors around to different cities to give presentations. And so we were driving from Petra to Aqaba, and people had warned us that the Khamsin, the 50 days of blowing were coming. But when we left, it was clear and beautiful and lovely and no problem. And so we thought, oh, they're crazy. So we got in this miserable little awful rental car and we're driving down the King's Highway, which is a nice, big, improved highway. And the first moment I knew we were in a situation as I was looking at the air vents on this old car, and I saw this mist coming up through the air vents, and I thought, that's weird. You know, sometimes air conditioning will do that. I thought maybe it like this humidity or something, but it was the desert and it was spring, it was cold, it was dry. And I said to my husband, what is that mist? And he's looking at it and he goes, he like kind of puts his fingers in it, he goes, that's sand. And we realized that the air was filling with sand. And I looked up and I saw these clouds coming over coming over the highway, and it was getting dark and the car was like filling with sand. I mean, you could feel it between your teeth. It was in our eyelashes, it was in our ears. My hair got all gritty. The road started to fill up with sand. And it happened so fast. It just was like a flash flood is the only thing I can compare it to. And if anyone has ever driven in a blizzard, that's what this was like. It became an actual storm of sand. And we had to follow these two tire tracks in the road ahead of us to stay on the road because we couldn't see anything else. It was so obliterating. And it was probably one of the scarier experiences of my life. And I kind of called on that experience. I relied on that for a lot of the that quality of trying to move through sand and what that feels like and how deeply unnatural and disturbing it is. So, and also the naked fear of the experience that also became part of it as well.
Wow. And
Yeah.
obviously you survived that experience.
Yes,
But,
we made it. I mean, it took us hours. It took us twice as
oh
long
my
as
goodness.
it would have, but yeah,
Well, thank
creeping.
goodness. And you were able
Yeah.
to use it in your book,
Yes.
that experience, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then the very last question, because it is getting late. Karen wanted to know, was wondering about the title, since it had Fencing with the King, which is, I love the title.
Oh, good.
It had more, the book had more to do with the title had more, sorry, I'm butchering this question, since the title had more to do with the father than the main character, Amani. So how did you choose the title?
You know, that was another kind of a question mark for me. I wasn't sure if that was the right title. And partly what happened is that I started the book with that title because I started with that idea of fencing with the king, and that original story I told you about. But as I wrote it, it became more and more and more Amani's story. And so I was really torn about whether to switch it. And for a while, I played with calling it the Blue Letter. But you know, I'm in a writing group, and they're wonderful. And I was asking them about what they thought about the title, and they said, you know what, the Blue Letter is too literal. It's too on the nose. You know, Fencing with the King is not technically the center of the book, but it's kind of a big part of the general zeitgeist, the feeling, the culture of the book. It's kind of a metaphor for what's happening in the book, that these characters are jousting, and they're jousting with different kinds of experiences. They're fighting over different kinds of possessions and things, and sometimes they're fighting about objects, sometimes they're fighting about people. So if you look at it metaphorically, people tended to, you know, opt for that. So, and I felt like it's an active title, which I like. I like something that has a little spark to it, you know. That my big totem, if you will, my mascot of the book was Zorro.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because that was my dad's inspiration for his fencing, and so I thought, yeah, I'm going to have to go back with the
The
fencing.
fencing.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was a good choice, and the cover is also beautiful with the falcon on the cover. I don't know if you could see it with my my virtual background. You probably, no one could see it, but everyone has their copy. So, but
Yeah, I love the cover.
It's just beautiful,
I love it. And the paperback has got a really pretty cover too. I just saw it, and it's also got the falcon, but it's a different interpretation of it.
Very nice, very nice. Well, thank you so very much for spending so much time with us. And you know, we hope to welcome you to Harrison when you come visiting out to New York.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. Yes, please. And you know, I'm on social media, you know, come find me. I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and you know, I love hearing from people. So I hope you'll come. Write reviews, please.
Sure.
My publisher is always after us for reviews. You know, come to my website.
Okay. Yeah, I did go. That's where I got your bio. Yeah, come to your house. We
Yeah.
shall. Thank you for being
you,
so
Judy.
hospitable and
Thank you so
gracious
much.
with your time. This was
Thank you,
wonderful.
guys.
Just wonderful.
Thank
Yes,
you,
Hi.
Judy.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great
very much.
questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right,
We'll
everybody.
see you again.
Bye.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Arrivederci. Bye.
Arrivederci.
What I know.